Well, I'm not sure how Monday snuck up on me this week, to be honest with you, Soby, but it is once again Monday. But on a positive note, I get to hang out with you for an hour or so. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
I can say good afternoon. You live in the future. You're ahead of me. You're in the Eastern time zone. I'm stuck here in Central, so to speak. So thank you for hanging out with me. I do appreciate it. How
Mhm.
you been? How you doing?
I'm doing good, Nate. How are you?
I can't complain. The weather's finally decent again. So, on so many of my previous shows, I had to complain about the fact that it was cold and rainy, and now all of a sudden it's like sunny and warm. And oh no, Glenn is here. We have a Glenn sighting.
Yeah.
Glenn, bless your heart, Glenn. In fact, let me just I'll just do one of these. Gotta get. Oh, there it is. Bless your heart. Bless your heart. Bless your heart. And of course, Simon's here, of course. Good evening, Simon. Good to have you. Thanks for being with us. So you and I were talking in the pre-show that I'm sure we have crossed paths, brushed shoulders multiple times over the last 6-ish years as we've been in and about these various spring events. But why don't we start where I always start, which is how did you get into technology? What was your path? And see, I told you that eventually one of my animals would join me. There's Chewy. He's gonna decide to, of course, go under the oh god, cats these days. Oh no, Jonathan's here too. Hey JJ, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you, man. Been too long. So how did you get into this weird space known as technology, and then we'll see what kind of trouble that gets us into from there.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because is it okay if I go back into my
Go
life?
back as far as you want.
All right. So I grew up as a child and teenager in India, southern part of India, South India, a state called Kerala. So that's where I did my basic schooling, elementary, middle school, high school. Completed high school, and in 1995 I came to the United States, and then that's where I did all my college education. So I was when I was in high school, my plan was to do some sort of engineering.
Sure.
I was good at chemistry back in high school days, so I wanted to do something in chemistry initially. But after came here, I took a course in C++ programming.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, in 1997, I believe. So after a few weeks of that course, I got hooked into programming for some reason. I mean, I like
Mm-hmm.
the way we think about abstractions and object-oriented programming. And back in those days, colleges used C++ as the beginning
Right.
language. These days they use Python, JavaScript, and things like that, which makes sense, I guess. But for many people, C++ was very hard. By the end of
Yeah.
the semester, you only see like one third of the class that started the semester with that type of thing. But for some reason, I got hooked into programming since then. So then I joined a university in Philadelphia called Drexel
Oh yeah.
University. That's where I did my undergraduate in computer science. So for a software engineering course, Drexel, the professor wanted us to do Java in '98.
Okay.
So he wanted to build us a sort of a website back in those days. Basically spit out HTML templates using Java. So he basically
Oh sure.
using a Java program to generate HTML templates, and then using that you basically build a website. So I really liked the way Java worked back then. I kind of uh, dug deep into that. Then I graduated from Drexel, and then I got a job, and then it was all C again. C
Oh.
Oracle, and and if you're Pro C, there's an Oracle specific C version that you communicate to Oracle for writing like stored procedures and things like that. So at that company in 2004, they were doing a some sort of a migration from a legacy system that they had. It's First Data. I don't know if you know the company.
Hmm.
So they were
Yeah.
doing a legacy migration from a legacy software into some new stuff, and they were using a Java based tools. And someone, this was 2004, Spring Framework was probably just GA 1.0 or something like that. So someone introduced this new framework called Spring. And I still remember I was trying to find out how this class is getting instantiated. I'm not seeing a new. So I'm like wondering what is the magic behind this. And I still remember that fall, 2004 fall, trying to find out details about that. And man, since then, since those days, throughout my career, I can pretty much say that every single day of my professional career, Spring was a part since those times. I still remember early 2005, I had a question about something about JDBC and stored procedures, and I asked a question in the Spring forums. So the first people who responded to the question were like Rod Johnson and Oregon. This was like back then. And these days, you cannot imagine the kind of from the people who created the framework and all. So I wish I can save that. It was like old Spring Framework forum. You know what I'm talking about? Like where you ask questions. And it was like pre-Stack Overflow and things like that.
Right.
So it was fun, and I think they created an issue out of that and made it to the framework. But fast forward to 2011, a friend of mine reached out to me from VMware, and then by then Spring Source was already acquired by VMware.
Yep.
And then there was a consulting organization called vFabric Consulting. So this was like 2011. I was like, they were doing a lot of consulting engagements, and then they wanted Spring people to go to client sites and then help with the client projects and all.
Sure.
So I essentially joined the vFabric Consulting org in 2011, and was at a company in Milwaukee, your neck of the woods.
Yes.
Short
plane ride from here.
Yeah. So I was doing vFabric Spring Consulting. Is again a legacy to an enterprise modern conversion project. Coles is the Coles department store in Milwaukee. So I was helping them with that, and then during that project, there was a need for some Kafka-based support in Spring. And this was like the beginning of Kafka, and there was no official support from the Spring side for Apache Kafka. So it was like 2012, 13 timeframe. So I basically wrote a first Kafka support for Spring. It was based on the context of Spring integration, like Kafka adapters. Then another friend of mine who was working at the same project at the company, I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Schaefer. He used to be a Spring engineer back then. So Chris and I were on the same team, working in the same project. So when he realized that I was writing this, Kafka adapters for this company, he asked me, I mean, this is all open source. Why can't you just contribute back to Spring? Or Spring. So he's the one who gave me the idea of, contributing to Spring. I thought that's an interesting idea. I mean, by that time, we were working closely with Spring team anyway, asking questions and all, because as consultants for Spring, we always have to engage with the Spring engineering team members and things like that. So I was like, I reached out to Mark Fisher, that, Kafka support I brought. So I think I asked him if he's interested, because he was the Spring integration lead back then. I asked him if he was interested in, having this, module in, Spring integration. He immediately responded saying, "I know that's a great idea." And then I submitted the PR. Back then, I think it was before GitHub time, so I had to send. I forgot what it ended up being. Anyway, long story short, I created the patch, and then, they accepted that as an extension. It was called a thing called Spring Integration Extensions. It was not part of the core Spring integration because Kafka was still incubating the whole. Again, you have to keep in mind that was like 2013. Kafka was still a new thing back then. So anyway, they merged the thing into Spring Integration Extension 2013. So since then, I was talking back and forth with the few folks in the Spring team like Gary, Mark Fisher, Mark Pollock, and people like that. Again, long story short, in 2016, I got the opportunity to come work for Spring Engineering in a formal capacity. So there was some openings for Spring Cloud Data Flow, Spring Cloud Stream, and projects like that. So I joined, and ever since I joined, I mean, every day is like a magic to me. I mean, this is the longest I stayed in one organization. So that tells something about
Right.
the work we do, as a Spring Engineering team members. So that is a condensed version of my technology story. Now I'll stop right here and I'll let you talk.
I agree with Simon. That is fascinating. And I mean, see, Soby, this is why we're talking in the pre-show. This is why I started this, because we spend so much time in our space talking about the technology and not nearly enough, in my opinion, talking about the people behind the technology. And I'm always struck at the stories that people have and the journeys that people have. I started as a chemistry major. And when I got to college, I thought, yeah, chemistry, that's fun. I like that. My son loves chemistry right now. And so I'm on one hand, I'm like, good. I like that. That's a good space to be in. But I'm also like, I think next year you should probably take some programming classes in high school, right? And it's like, yeah, I think I probably will. I'm like, yeah, I think we're going to do that. That would be very good. And I keep trying to kind of nudge him in that general direction. But I think it's always so interesting to me to remind people that some of these technologies, like, they haven't been around all that long, and we sort of take for granted that, well, yeah, I mean, of course we've always had a Kafka connector. It's like, no, it had to be written. Somebody had to see the need, and somebody had to step in and actually do it. So, I think that's very cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Simon, yeah, it also shows, yeah, well, exactly, Simon. And that's one of the things that I've really strived to do, especially when I have someone like Soby or Glenn or Oleg. I mean, so many of these folks in the last few months have been Spring committers, and the message, and my cat's doing something here. I don't know what the cat's trying to do. Good job, cat. You can contribute, and I think there's like this wall some people build in their mind that, oh no, see, I'm not a good enough engineer to contribute. I really, I don't have a PhD, or I don't have 20 years of contributing to open source, or I didn't create this project. So what could I possibly have to contribute? And I think it's just a good reminder that we've all got something, even if it's a doc fix, which, Glenn and I've talked about multiple times, the value of submitting a patch for a documentation issue or a tutorial issue, etc.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, it's open source is like a vast field. Everybody has something to do there. If you really want to get into open source.
Right. And you bring a unique perspective to it as well. I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in our own version of it. I've been working on this little Spring app to kind of scratch an itch and play with some stuff. And I was talking with Deshaun about something, I guess this was last month, and he just looked at me and says, just do that as an enum. It doesn't need to be a table. Get out of your architect hat here, dude. And just having that other perspective of, oh yeah, I guess it is my code. I could just redeploy it if I needed to add an element. That wouldn't be so bad. And
yeah, of course.
You're absolutely right, Glenn. And everybody does have their first commit. And thanks to you, I actually have one of those. So, box checked, because you guided me right through that process. So heck, if an architect can do it, come on. I think everybody's got something that they could certainly throw into the mix. But so how did you find Pennsylvania of all places? What brought you to the East Coast and that part of the world?
Oh, that's another interesting story. So basically, we have family here. We had family here. So my aunt and uncle, they used to live. They live here actually.
Okay.
They are the ones who were instrumental in actually bringing me here. So
sure.
Came here. I was with my family. So this is where we settled. And ever since Pennsylvania has been home for the last almost 30 years now. So yeah. So I lived in Pennsylvania for more than half of my life. So
wow.
So it's yeah. I like it being here.
That's awesome.
That's
awesome. So now you're on the Philadelphia side. So does that make you like an Eagles fan, or do you stay away from the joy that is Philadelphia sports, where they will boo Santa Claus?
I'm a big Eagles fan, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Philly is a big sports town. There are a lot of sports teams here.
And they take that very seriously. There's no getting around it. Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. So okay, all right. I mean, it could be worse. You could be a Vikings fan, in which case there is no hope, and that they will simply tear your heart out of your chest cavity and stomp all over it every year.
I'm sure you're a Vikings fan, right? Are you?
I am. I would like sometime in my lifetime to see the Vikings get to the Super Bowl. But I have to admit, it gives me pause because I realize if they lose, which, can happen, would likely happen in my experience, they would then become the team with the most losses in Super Bowl history. They are currently tied with the Bills at 4. And I really don't want them to own that record by themselves. So until the Bills lose another Super Bowl, I'm really of two minds about whether I want the Vikings to make it. And it's going to be interesting. I just read an article last week in The Athletic about how this is probably the rebuild year where, we won't call it tanking because, the NFL doesn't like it when we say that. But you look at all the people the Vikings are shedding, and it's clear they're gunning for a high draft pick to hopefully get the franchise quarterback. But I don't know. Sports, as I tell my son repeatedly, do not bet money on sports. That's a surefire way to lose your money. But
that's for sure. Yeah.
But City finally won the treble. They finally got their Champions League final win. So feeling a little better about that. So I guess that helps. Just pick a team that has essentially unlimited funding, and then you get more chances of seeing them win. But such is life. Oh man. So do you have any advice or recommendations for someone who's out there going, gosh, I'd really like to contribute, but I just don't even know where to get started. Again, there's sort of that I don't feel like I can do it. So from your perspective, what would you say to somebody who was kicking the tires on contributing, whether it's to Spring or really any of the open source software out there?
Yeah. So basically there are a couple of prisms through which you can look at that question. We see, there are students who are basically studying in colleges. I mean, maybe, sometimes the professors ask them to do it as part of the course, get involved with a project and then do that. And so we see some minor doc fixes or, some cleanup stuff. And then, they do it. And then after finishing that, they just go away. They just completely disappear. You can tell that it's just therefore, one particular activity or like I said course, university course or something like that. And then there are other folks who are working at a project, and this is like the other end of the spectrum, who are working on a project and they really want a feature that is missing in the project, and then they basically do a big bang commit or a PR, pull request into the project, and then they basically add a new feature or major enhancement to the framework. So those are the two types of ends. But then there are other people who are in the middle. They always give feedback through new issues or bug fixes or cleanup tasks or answering questions on Stack Overflow and things like that. And those people do it just out of their passion. They love this stuff. So in my opinion, it doesn't matter. You can be at anywhere in the spectrum. If you really want to do open source. My take is that if you really have a use case in mind, like in my case, my first open source contribution came about because of a particular use case, and someone was really asking for it. And I knew that if I write that stuff, at least there's going to be some use of it. It's not like, I'm going to, write something and then just, archive it right away or put it in that. It's not like that. So if you are getting into open source, I would say, just try to see if there's going to be any use cases for that out there. Whether you're going to get any feedback, that's an important thing to keep in mind. And then you basically, start writing some code or start writing, doing something with that open source project. Let's say that you like, Spring Boot or Cloud, Spring Cloud Stream or whatever. You try to find some niche within that framework and try to see if you can write something, and then just engage with the project maintainers, and then see if there's a room for that feature or that change that you're making, to be made as a change in the framework, and then take it from there. Sometimes it doesn't even have to be writing code, as you already it might be some reading the docs and then cleaning up some doc spots. Sometimes go to Stack Overflow and then find your favorite open source projects tag, and then see if there's any new question. We definitely need a lot of help. That part of the open source side. Open source is a community, right? It's like not like a single product or single project. When you say an open source project, the actual framework or software is only one part of the equation. There are many other ways, like the community that you're maintaining, the Stack Overflow community, the GitHub community, sometimes the Gitter community. I don't know if people might ask questions on Reddit or other social media stuff. So if you can find out these threads and then try to answer these things as the best you can, I think that will certainly give an edge to you, definitely in my opinion. So that will, you'll be noticed, if you really do those sort of things. So I don't think, to answer that question, there is no black and white type of definite answer. Right. It depends, and then you find where you belong and then try to improve on that.
That's a great point. I was going to bring up Stack Overflow. There is no shortage of questions out there, and some of them have great answers, some of them have less than awesome answers. And one of the things that I've sort of struggled with as I've worked on this little application I've been building is Spring's been around for a while. This isn't just been a 6-month, 2-year kind of journey. And so I would Google something and I would find 5 different answers. And so then the challenge for me is, okay, well, which one of these is the correct answer today? I mean, they all work, but is this the right way to do it? Is there a more modern way to do it? And I've had that experience multiple times where I've had to kind of like, wait a minute, I think that's an older approach, and let me try to find, yes, here it is. Means even something as seemingly trivial as local date being added into Java. If you haven't been in that space for a while, you may not be aware there's a new date class that makes dates at least somewhat simpler to work with. I wouldn't say we've completely solved the date problems, but at least it's better than what we had before. And so helping with that is really useful as well. And one of the things Glenn and I've talked a lot about is some people seem really resistant to, well, this is too basic. There are a whole boatload of developers who this is their first Spring project. And so, or their first project with React or Angular. And so something that is super basic is something they really need right now. And don't feel like you have nothing to contribute, because you almost assuredly do. And Fuel says Java 1.6 is pretty new. Yeah, I mean, in certain contexts, yes, Fuel, I would say that Java 1.6 is pretty new. I mean, it's all relative, I guess. I've always thought the cutoff was 1.8, but then I had some conversations last week with some folks who were like, yeah, we're just trying to get to 1.11. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Well, you might need to try to get to 17 or 21. I mean, come on. Water's nice over here. Oh, you're kidding me, Fuel. You were coding new Java stuff in 2017 in 1.5. That breaks my heart just a little bit.
There are some companies who cannot upgrade their stack, for various reasons. Really have to stick with an older version sometimes. Depending on sometimes these things are not in your control, right? Depending on the enterprise that you work.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like things are have gotten simpler with cloud giving us the ability to spin up different stacks. The fact that applications are more likely to be containerized. You don't have that one version to rule them all. I mean, for so much of my career, it's like, oh no, we can't upgrade until big strategic app is ready, and they're not going to do this for another 2 years. And so you're stuck on this ancient version for forever. And interesting, radio base stations. So sometimes I can see where there's some restrictions in terms of hardware or other things. But I mean, in general, I would hope that people can move forward. Speaking of that, when the latest version of Spring was announced, one of the, I mean, I don't want to say it was controversial, but I know some people reacted to the fact that there's a new baseline Java version. And I was a little surprised at some of the reactions I saw of, oh, no, this will never fly. No one can upgrade to 17. I'm like, no one? That seems like a pretty bold statement. I mean, I know I've had some conversations with some of our clients where, yeah, we still got some stuff that we're hoping to get to 1.8, and you do everything in your power to not like verp in your mouth there. But yeah, I mean, I don't, do you have any thoughts on the it's a thoughtful decision. It's not like you all got in a room and said, that's it. We're doing this because everybody's got to get drug forward. I mean, there's good reasons why some of those decisions were made.
Yeah, of course. Basically, whenever there is a new Java version comes up, it comes loaded with a lot of cool things, right? The virtual thread, the latest, the virtual threads, and the project Loom, and that checkpoint support, the project Crack, and all those things. I mean, these are all when we think about the old days of Java 1.4 or 1.5, it's amazing how far the language has evolved, right? In the same way, you can make the same argument about Spring also. Like,
right.
You mentioned the Spring Framework 1.0 GA back in 2004. I mean, when you think about Spring Framework 6.0, it's like the amazing advancements in
right.
technology, the software stack is like, it's mind-boggling, right? Think about it, all the improvements that we made over the years. So, and plus, think about all the security enhancements.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, that's, I agree. It's a bold statement when someone says that nobody will migrate to 17 or 21. I mean, there's always a benefit if we can migrate to the latest and greatest, because the frameworks and the open source software, teams try their best to, make sure that the latest GAs available are the best of, what they can do, for that version, right? So I think, it's always a good idea to upgrade to the latest stacks if at all possible. Yeah.
Simon makes a good point that, so if you're integrating with an ancient COBOL app, that was, yeah, there's a lot of code that predates all of us, and they didn't set it up properly, basically, and now you're writing Java 8 in 2022, and there certainly are some of those restrictions out there. But Glenn inspired this. Fuel says that Simon describes his work. Oh my, yes, I know we that's come up a few times, Fuel. But Glenn sort of inspired this concept to me, and I use this when Dan and I talk about sort of convincing people to migrate to the new version of Spring and Spring Boot. You would never get on an airplane that the airline said to you, well, we haven't done any maintenance on this plane in 5 years because it's all working. So we didn't want to do anything that might break anything. Because I hear that a lot in software, like, oh, we didn't want to touch it because it's working. Don't touch it. Okay, but you admit that in most of your life, you're doing maintenance on things. You're taking your car in for an oil change or getting your tires rotated or whatever. And, there are bits and pieces there that do have to be maintained. And we expect that that's just comes with the territory. Yeah, exactly. Simon, that upgrade, there's a cost to the status quo. And I think people need to understand that the status quo isn't free. That's one of my favorite comments, right? That, but moving to these newer versions, you definitely get some features that we didn't have in the past. It simplifies the development stack. so yeah, text blocks is a good example. And then let's see what we got here on that front. I'd love to have seen templates land in 20. Yeah, it's always hard. Some things definitely have to get cut in order to make it happen. But yeah, I feel you're right. I mean, the cost comes into this equation, right? There's no getting around that the cost to do the upgrade isn't zero, but there's a cost to not doing the upgrade as well. And sometimes that's an opportunity cost. Sometimes it's harder to maintain. It takes us longer to add new features. We have a security vulnerability we can't do anything about. There's a cost to that too. And I think people need to realize that. And I know that's hard sledding. I've spent almost my entire career in enterprise IT dealing with that. And, but we have to get better at doing that in, bits and pieces, as opposed to the big bang. Okay, we're going to make this huge leap from Java 1.6 to Java 21. Like, ooh, that's going to hurt.
Yeah. And I guess the performance aspect is also a big factor, I mean, security and performance are two main things, in my opinion, or kind of force people to do the upgrades. Think about the enterprises that stuck with the Java 5 or 6 or 8. I mean, those are the times that you hear people compare Java with C++. Oh, Java is not good because it's not native code,
Right.
compare. But these days, those comparisons, I don't hear those comparisons anymore with the latest Java. I mean, it's for all practical purposes, unless you are trying to write a rocket ship or something like that, for all practical purposes, you don't hear that comparison that Java is not fast enough or performant.
Right.
But then again, if you're stuck on an older version, you probably lose all those benefits.
Yeah, it's a good point, Jonathan. Security audits drive some of this too. And then Simon chimes in with, it's hard for development staff when you get to use newer stuff at home, and then you go into a client, you got to use something really old. You're absolutely right. Well, that's a fair point, Fuels Nabel. I mean, there definitely are times where Java, at least in its JIT form, is not your best bet. But yeah, Open Read, that's a good point. We should probably talk about that at some point. I'll see what kind of trouble I can get into there, Simon. That's a good question. But I think the other thing you're kind of hinting at there, and this is sort of what Jonathan and Simon bring up, there's a cost in terms of attracting talent, retaining talent. And, I always remember that old adage when people would say, oh, why would we pay for training? You'll just leave after you get upskilled. And the response I usually tried to give, and I don't know who first told me this, was, yeah, but imagine the people who you'll retain if you don't. I mean, it's you want the people who are learning new things and evolving your application, taking advantage of some of these newer, simpler things, safer things, more secure things. And it's just developers and organizations, I hope, are starting to understand that sort of total cost of ownership piece of the equation. But I don't know. It's yes, resume-driven design. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's what we're talking about with Kubernetes and Kafka, Jonathan. Resume-driven design, is that where we want to go? We could certainly go down that path. So how did you get? Speaking of Kafka, how did you get into that space, and what are your thoughts? Because that to me is such a huge shift. I mean, I worked on an application many moons ago that would have been a wonderful fit for sort of that event-driven concept. Of course, it didn't exist for all practical purposes, and we certainly didn't have anything like Kafka to do this in. In retrospect, I would have written that application with Kafka at its as the data store of record, frankly, because that was so much of what we were doing was being able to show things as they were in the past. And to me, that's a win. But so how did you get into that space? What are your thoughts on sort of event-driven and its approach to application architecture?
Sure. So as I mentioned in my initial answer to your initial question about technology, so if you look back into the time frame 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, what was the big theme in our part of the world? I guess from what I could remember, it was like big data, right? Big data was the big theme, like the Hadoops of the world, Spark, and those things were like, the nomenclature that you hear all the time if you work at a software organization, Java organization, you hear that all the time. So up until then, the normal way you write applications were like JMS instead of Java, you use like JMS or MQP, RabbitMQ, things like that. But then I got into Kafka side of things, as I mentioned. I was working at this company, and then they were into event-driven type of applications, and I had to do some research into the space, and I immediately saw the need for writing some Spring support for Apache Kafka back then, and then as part of that, I happened to be learning more about this particular space, and realized that Apache Kafka is like a great tool for this particular use cases of event-driven streaming sort of applications, because of their that log-based structure, where you always append the data without modifying anything that was already there. It's you always append your data at the end of the log file. It's like the Kafka, the log data structure, right? And then it is like partitioned. You get automatic scalability and fault tolerance that Kafka guarantees in those days, and even until recently through quorum based zookeeper based leader maintenance and that sort of approach. And now they completely removed the need for zookeeper through the Raft protocol things. So I believe that Apache Kafka is a leader when it comes to that streaming event-driven type of use cases. And Spring from the beginning of that journey provided a deeper stack for Kafka specific use cases through a number of projects. As I already mentioned, the initial Kafka support was in Spring Integration Kafka. And then when Spring XP was around, I was not involved with that back then. But then, Gary and a few others in the Spring team, they actually created another project, carved out the Spring integration component, and then created another project called Spring for Apache Kafka around like 2015 or 2016. That became sort of the foundational library for everything that Spring provides for Apache Kafka. So Spring for Apache Kafka is like a very popular project. Gary Russell is the project lead, and it has a lot of GitHub activity going on in that project. So basically, anything that Spring provides for Kafka, you need that library, Spring for Apache Kafka. So you include that, and even from a Spring Boot angle, Spring Boot uses Spring for Apache Kafka to provide auto configuration for the various Kafka components. And then in Spring Cloud Stream, we use the Spring for Apache Kafka to build a particular construct called Kafka binders. So they provide like message Spring integrations, message channels based Kafka binder, using which you can easily create like different producer and consumer applications. And then Kafka also provides another library called Kafka Streams. So that is their solution for stream processing systems. If you want to write like real-time streaming data systems, you can just embed this Kafka Streams library in your application and then start writing code, almost equivalent to Project Reactor. You can imagine the programming model to be the same as Reactor code. Like you get some data and then you operate things on it in a functional way using a fluent type of DSL. So it is Kafka Streams. Spring for Apache Kafka provides basic foundational support for Kafka Streams. Also, again, we take that same support and then build a binder for Kafka Streams in Spring Cloud Stream. And then we provide a reactive Kafka binder based on another project called Reactor Kafka, again maintained by the Spring engineering team. I don't want to go into much details. This is like what Kafka, what Spring provides for Apache Kafka from a high level, and if you want, we can go into the details. But then as we always say, you can basically, depending on the actual use case, you can start using any of these frameworks and then build your Java-based Spring and Kafka applications.
See, that's the thing that's always attracted me to Spring, especially when I've got my architect hat on, is it allows us that flexibility to change things out later without having to completely nuke and pave and rewrite and start over. And I think that's one of the real geniuses behind so many of the things that plug in that oh, you want to swap this out, you can do that, and it isn't a complete rewrite. To me, that's a huge win. I don't like painting myself into a corner.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point, because one of the biggest advantages of using a framework like Spring Cloud Stream, for example, is that I think Mark Heckler used to have a talk shows this. So basically, use Spring Cloud. Let's say that your company is using Apache Kafka today, and then tomorrow, for whatever reason, I mean, I haven't really seen this happening in real world, and there might be instances, but let's say that you have tomorrow your company realize that, oh, we don't want to use Kafka anymore, we want to use Apache or RabbitMQ, for example.
Sure.
You can basically the theory is that you can take this Kafka binder dependency out and then add Rabbit binder, and with the same application code without making any change, it will work. Tomorrow, the next day, you realize that, oh, we are not happy with Rabbit. We want to take the same application and then run against Kinesis, Amazon Kinesis,
Right.
or Google PubSub, or Apache Pulsar. You use the binder dependency in the class path, and it will work. But in practice, I will tell you though, it's almost like the Java promise of what was that? Write once.
Write once, yeah. Run anywhere.
You know that things are not as rosy as it sounds. I mean, even though that is the model, at the end of the day, you probably have to make some changes.
Sure.
But the general principle remains the same.
Right.
You don't have to do a massive rewrite of your application.
Right.
So that's one of the beauty of Spring Cloud Stream, in my opinion. Although I'm a bit biased because I write code for Spring Cloud Stream, but I've seen that, and it's for many applications, especially trivial applications, it really works. Just swap the dependency with the different middleware, and then the application just simply works.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Fuel also brings in and Hibernate. You can just switch DBs tongue in cheek, and I mean, good point. There's going to be some amount of rework, but at least it's not a wholesale start at the beginning, go back and rewrite everything. And Fuel made a comment earlier about a lot of devs are hyper focused on whatever they perceive as the most relevant thing. This gets into Jonathan's RDD comment, resume driven design, and he then went on to say that I end up having to maintain things after people get bored with it. I do think that's a genuine problem in technology, is that people flip from one thing to another so quickly, and they don't sort of fully appreciate that, yeah, this thing still works. It's still solid and it gets the job done. And you don't need to change tools just because there's a new tool. There's always going to be another new tool. And I think that's one of those dangers that we run into a lot in our space is, folks just always want to be playing with the latest and greatest. And it's like, yeah, but we got to get code to production, and, reliable and stable and tested is pretty powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Yeah.
That's certainly one of the things I appreciate about the Spring ecosystem, frankly, but that's just me. I mean, I'm literally wearing a Spring shirt, so, I may not be completely unbiased on that front. Yeah, exactly. Who wants to maintain old clocks? Exactly. Yeah. A lot of software developers don't want to mess with old code. And I understand that. I mean, reading heritage code, legacy code, hero code, whatever you want to call it, not anyone's idea of a good afternoon, but it's a pretty important part of this space if you want to have a successful career, in my opinion. So,
I mean, to that angle, Nate, I would have. Spring is always innovating. It's another thing. I remember in those initial times I mentioned in the 2007, 8, and people used to wonder. I wondered myself, what is after this for Spring? I mean, it's
right.
You do your dependency injection, you're done. I mean, what other things?
What else could there be?
What else could there be? Exactly. So I mean, I always get amazed at the way things are getting innovated in this
right.
scheme. I mean, 5 years ago, you couldn't even imagine things like, supporting, Project Loom or virtual
Right.
threads in Java, and then adding support for that in framework 6.x, and, or GraalVM native
Yes.
storage. That's another big thing, right? I mean, it's the level of innovation and the fact that that is getting translated into the developer community one day at some point. It's really, it's like a miracle to me, the way things move and work the way they are. It's like really amazing.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think that's a good thing to remember is we're really bad at making predictions, especially about the future. I think that's an attributed Niels Bohr quote. And who knows what we're going to be doing in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. That's one of the things I love about this space is that there's always new toys to play with and new things and stuff that we had no idea. I think if you would have told me when I was in college that at this point in my career, the vast majority of the code that we're interacting with is running on some variant of Linux, I would have laughed at you. Like, that's impossible. And the idea of short-term leasing someone else's, servers. I deployed my application. Well, I did it on a cloud provider and Heroku, and that was a fairly straightforward process, all things considered. That's the kind of thing that 10 years ago, oh man, I would have had to have stood up a server, and I would have had to get an app server. I mean, it would have been a lot more work than what I did. I mean, it was with Heroku, it was basically like an after. I mean, it was like 2 hours, and that was including a custom domain and everything. And it's like, yeah, that was pretty straightforward. So
I still remember 10 years ago, like I mentioned Hadoop and all those things. Imagine the pain that you had to go through to set up like a Hadoop cluster. I mean, we're doing like a normal local development stuff. It was like a day's worth of work to set up a cluster,
right.
Doing things. Today, look at the way container technology changed things. Like if you want to run like at the moment, I have on my local machine, I have a Kafka running, I have a Redis running, I probably have MySQL running, all in Docker containers, and I probably use them at different times of a single day. And in the past, it was kind of unthinkable. I mean, you need to like file tickets and then submit it to the teams responsible for that, and they take their time and then give you the IP address of the cluster. I mean, those days are gone. I mean, it's
right.
It's so marvelous, and it's so funny that you mentioned that. The future is completely unpredictable. Who knows how we do things in 10 years from today?
Right. Well, I mean, some people seem to think that these generative AI models are going to replace all of us. And yes, you're right. The cat finally made an appearance. The other cat decided to show up. He knocked something over because that's what he does. So he's grumpy that he can't pair with me. He likes to be involved with these for sure. So the streaming popularity. Yeah, no, I would love to find a way to just stream my cats. I think that actually would, frankly, be more popular than anything I could put out there. But there's a few good comments back in here I wanted to hop on real quick. So Fuel made a good comment about the fact that everybody likes to talk about readable code, but it's a really hostile audience. I can attest to that. One of the things that I've been trying to talk a lot about the last year and a half or so is sort of more software engineering fundamentals. And it amazes me how resistant audiences can be to that. I think everyone thinks, oh no, I'm advanced. I don't need the basics. And I think about that in terms of sort of soft skills in particular. There's a lot of developers who don't think they need those types of skills, relationships, communication, et cetera. And it's like, yeah, no, those are going to last you your entire career. And, I think I make this plug almost every week, but if you haven't read How to Win Friends and Influence People, you're missing out. Like that book will absolutely, change how you approach these things.
That's the Dale Carnegie.
Yeah, exactly. And somebody asked me, oh man, this was last fall, give me 2 architecture books recommendations. I said, okay, well, Neil and Mark's Architecture, the Hard Parts, and How to Win Friends and Influence People. And they were somewhat surprised at that one. But so Fuel thinks JavaScript will be the final language. I mean, it's Lisp and C clothing, I believe, is what Crockford said at one point. And here's an interesting one is will Git be replaced? It's funny you mentioned that, Fuel. I just saw something on like 3 sort of source code tools that you haven't heard about yet, but will be using at some point in the future with that exactly in mind, sort of replacing Git. I'd be curious to see what that looks like. I don't know if it's anytime soon. I guess it depends on what you mean by soon. But I think at least for now, you'll probably get out of my cold dead hands. Let's see here. What else did he say? Okay.
It's
Kills mech.
it's funny that comment. Who's going to replace Git? I mentioned Subversion right in the 2005-6 timeframe. When Subversion came along, people thought that that's it. I mean, that was like a big game changer when compared to something
Right.
like IBM's Clear Case or technologies, right?
Trigger warning, Fuel. Clear case. Trigger warning.
Yeah, but then Git came along and it was like a completely game changer for that.
But I don't think that was obvious at the time. I mean, I remember moving to Subversion and being like, "Oh, thank God, this is so much better." And then Git appeared, and I didn't get it. I mean, maybe that just is my lack of vision, or what. Maybe I was just so happy to not be dealing with some of the worst tools that I've used in the past that Subversion really fixed some of those problems. But then you start playing around with it and you start realizing what it can do that Subversion can't or other tools can't do. And you go, oh, okay. And then eventually you're just like, I can't imagine doing anything else. I mean, that ability to have such granular commits to me is such a huge win. Being able to do 20 minutes of work. Yep, that's good. Commit. And then I've got that checkpoint that I can roll back to. And to me, but something will replace it. Something replaces everything. Right. And there's just no getting around that. So, oh yeah, let's see. Well, every tool has shortcomings, Fuel. I mean, there's no getting around that. There's no tool is perfect. Anybody who says my tool is perfect is missing something, to say the least. Nothing to learn from software from the 70s. I know you're being tongue in cheek there, but yes, there's no two ways. Oh, clear case is fine. I think those are fighting words, Fuel. I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to get around that one. And yeah, I agree, Jonathan. That might be a bit of a boiling frog concept. So there's no getting around that. Thank you. Well played, sir. Well played. Let's see, anything else I wanted to highlight here from Fuel? Fuel's been going nuts in our comments here, but no, I think Fuel, your point is well taken. Something will replace it, and we'll all be looking back like, I can't believe we didn't use this sooner. And I think anybody who tries to convince you that they know where this industry is going, nope, I don't think so. Past tells me that it's going to be something we hadn't anticipated or a direction that nobody saw coming, and we'll see what happens. That's what I love about this space. Yeah. All sorts of fun things. Well, let me shift gears a little bit and poke at some other stuff. So what do you do for fun? What do you do when you're not writing code, staring at screens? What do you do to get away from it?
Oh, that's a completely interesting question, Nate. I read. I try to read, and not like fiction or anything. I generally try to read, different types of books and things like that. About various topics.
Sure.
I mentioned that I grew up in India as a child, and so in my thinking, wherever you grew up as a child in your young years, the music of that culture sticks with you forever. In my case, I'm really still attached to the Indian music. Like
sure.
classical music. So I was trained in music when I was a child in India, so I still carry that musician thing with me. So I spend time listening to Indian music, sometimes doing some minor compositions here and there, again in the language I grew up with. And, so music and reading. So I'm a family man, so I have kids, so those things are keep me very busy all the time. So that's my non-work things.
Parenting is one of those interesting things where for a huge chunk of your life, your identity becomes insert child name parent. I was at one of my son's track meets in the last couple of weeks, and I managed to get to a pretty good chunk of them. And he's a thrower, so there's a small group. There's like 3 boys throwers, and I was standing around at one of the meets, and one of the other throwers looked at me and said, "Hey, Everett's dad." And I just realized, yep, that's exactly how most of us are referred to, is, oh, you're so and so's parent. And I know whenever we go to like a soccer practice or something like, oh, which one's yours? Okay, you're Jose's dad. Okay, and you start to make those kind of connections. And it is an interesting experience. And I think your children are a little younger than mine. My boy is a teenager now, and it's really interesting to realize that we're nearing kind of the end of the more intensive aspect of it, in the sense that he's driving now. So mom and dad get more time back, but it's also a little bit like, well, I kind of miss some of these things. And the wheel of time keeps turning, as they say.
The funny thing is that as we grow older, you still think that you might be in your young years, and you might be thinking like that. And when people refer you as, your son's dad, or, I'm a dad, and, I have other responsibilities and things like that,
Wait, now Fuel says it's time for grandkids. No, not yet. He's too way too young for that. I don't even want to think about that. That's not an age I'm ready for. I'm not like Berglund, who is like, bring it on. I'm just not. I'm not there. I'm not there. So, living in Philadelphia, do you have any opinions on the cheesesteak wars, of which is the right way to either order your cheesesteak or from where? I know that's like tabs versus spaces in our world. I don't know
I was at that downtown, the center city. We call it center city here in Philly, the downtown area. So there's like famous two cheesesteak places in the South Philly, right? Dino's and Pat.
Yep.
I got cheesesteaks, and it's pretty good. And I heard that they get some international customers every now and then. People come from other countries just to eat cheesesteak from there. It's okay, but then living here, in my opinion, I realized that there are a lot of minor, small shops in the suburbs, equally good, as these big famous people. I think people don't know about them. Like small deli places that make cheesesteak, the Philly cheesesteak, and I had some really, really, really good cheesesteaks, from these places. So if you come to Philly area, check out these suburban, cheesesteak places. It might be as good as really big ones. Yeah.
I just saw something about people who live in touristy places and sort of their advice to tourists, and that was ironically one of them was, they're not as good as people make it out to be. You can get better.
Yeah.
I know I'm sure controversial in some spaces, but there's nothing around that. So so Fuel brings this one up. So one of the things that makes me feel old is when I make a brilliant TV or movie reference and it falls flat, and then people are like, oh yeah, I wasn't even born when that was popular. Yeah, there's no getting around that. You definitely do run into that from time. Although I like to point out that getting older sucks, except for the alternatives, Fuel. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? But, well, Soby, I know I'm sure keep lobbing questions about Philadelphia and other things at you, but I know we're just about at the top of the hour. Anything else you want to talk about?
I just saw Glenn's comment about I-95.
Oh, yeah.
It happened yesterday. So I don't usually travel that, Glenn, all the time, that direction. But then it's like a big deal. I mean, I think the road is I-96. I don't know. I mean, I-95 is a very, an important route that people take. That goes from Florida all the way to Maine, I guess.
I think so.
Yeah, so they better fix that sooner.
Road construction, it's inevitable. See, you got to pay the maintenance cost. There's just no getting around it. That's something people understand. You can't have potholes forever, even though it's a pain in the butt when you eventually have to resurface the road. What are the alternatives? We come home.
It's funny, we were talking about maintenance and the cost of maintenance and all these things. It just directly maps into a real world scenario here.
Yeah.
Maintain your software,
Yeah. Well, I mean, real world example, my family, we came home from a trip and I hit a pothole that I didn't see. And it was so large that it blew my tire out. And so I had to get a new tire, actually get 2 new tires because, all wheel drive, that's the downside of all wheel drive. And that's the kind of thing you look at and you're like, yeah, that's got to be fixed. And if that means you got to shut this road down for a few days or a few weeks to fix it, that's the cost of doing business, because the alternatives. And the thing that I thought was ironic is, as I managed to get to this gas station, so I wasn't trying to do this on the side of the road or get, AAA to come to the side of the road. another car pulled in that had also blown out a tire on that side. And so I guarantee he hit the exact same pothole. And then when I took my car in to get it fixed, the agent I was working with, the service guy, said, yeah, I ran into that pothole too. So I mean, it's just amazing that I guarantee I wasn't the first. I guarantee I wasn't the last. So I guess the only people who are happy about that are the folks who are selling tires. But
Okay.
what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, Soby, thank you for hanging out with me. I really do appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun, and I hope it was relatively painless for you. I know in the pre-show there was a little hesitancy there, but what am I getting myself into?
Yeah. But thank you, Nate, for having me. I mean, I really had fun. Really enjoyed talking to you and seeing all the comments. It's an eye-opener session for me. I didn't expect that this was going to be this relaxed.
Right. I mean, it's all it is. It's all it is. It's just chatting. It's
Well,
all
I thought I had to write some code or something to get through the hours.
No. That's the coding stuff. I mean, that's a dime a dozen. It's this part that I miss. And as I was telling you in the pre-show, it's all about the hallway track for me. I so desperately miss that, and it's something that I really enjoy. I was at J Nation last week, and I got into some great conversations with people. Between talks and during breaks, and I mean, to me, that's one of the real powerful parts of this, right, is being able to have those conversations and see how people are using this or problems they're having in the real world, and just that shared experience to me is so powerful. But well, I hope you and I'll hang out a little bit in Vegas at VMworld for our Spring One experience. So don't be afraid to come up and say hi.
I will definitely, looking forward to it. Yeah.
I'm quite harmless. I don't bite. And thanks you, Simon, for hanging out. I really do appreciate it. Simon's one of my sort of super commenters. I love that, along with Fuel and Glenn. So I love my regulars, and it's nice to see Jonathan pop in here. So I'm continuing this spring thing. I've got Muhammad next week, so we're just kind of doing the spring thing here for some various reason. I don't know, just the way the schedule broke down. Lots of spring folks, so I'm always love that. I'm quite harmless. Yeah, that's probably safe. I mean, I don't think I'm a wolf wearing sheep's clothing, Fuel, but you tell me. Maybe that's not for me to decide. But anyway, well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate your time, and we'll see you in August at the VMworld, I hope.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Cheers.